Okay. Welcome to Tech Bags Are Due. I am Jake Regini, senior footwear designer, and that only means I've been a footwear designer for longer than 6 years or 7 years. Whatever. Well, welcome. It is a new year, a new us. We are hopefully going to have more of a presence online now that I have had some time to figure out this whole video stuff. But we're excited to have a full year to kind of keep this project going. Tech Packs Are Due, talking to footwear designers, talking about footwear from the perspective of real life footwear designers. Something I think, again, is like, we need it. We need it in the industry. We need it in this podcast space, even though everyone and their brother has a podcast. Maybe it's good to have footwear designers sit down and talk. It's good. All right. I've been saying it for a while. This is like I think this is going to be the big one. This is the, this is the podcast that shoots us to the moon. I have Daniel Shirley, like the man, Daniel Shirley. It's just great to have you on. We have, we're in the same program together, but I will say that in the program there were some students that I think I knew had the skills to get things done, and spoiler alert, I was not one of them. I did not feel like one of them. But Dan and Aaron and a couple others, I really feel like had just such a dynamic style and a really good brain attached to that style. It's not enough to just be able to sketch something. You got to be able to think through stuff. And I feel like Dan had that. And wow, lo and behold, he has had a super fun career. I've loved following it as well. And just seeing where you've gone. What's crazy to me though is that I think it's just fun that I can say that we both came from the same place, the same starting point, and then we're here and we're making waves. It's just cool. Like, I don't know. Sometimes you go to school and I don't know. I don't know about the year behind us and the year before us, but like it feels like a couple of us have gone on and to do some cool stuff, which I think is, it says something, and it's just fun to be a part of it. But anyway, so welcome, Dan. Daniel. Sorry, he was Dan at BYU, and now I like Daniel. I'm gonna say Daniel the rest of the time. I promise.
That's fine. That's fine. My family still calls me Dan. Because I didn't have a preference. I was just like, yeah, whatever. And then over time, I grew into the identity a bit more, and I was like,
yeah. Well, Daniel, welcome. You can say whatever you want. This is I keep saying this to people. I guess I started the podcast, but you're on it. It's as much as yours as it is mine. I want you to feel comfortable having the floor. So, welcome.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I knew you had a podcast, I was like, oh, that'd be super fun. So I'm glad that I didn't have to wait months and months and months before you reached out. I don't know. It's funny because I think the way, like, kind of a life lesson and something you start to realize when you're on teams professionally is like, there's the way that you perceive yourself, and then there's the way that your team perceives you. And so it's kind of funny to me to hear what you thought of me in school, because when I look back on school, I was like, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, my designs weren't very good. Like,
right.
But I just, I kept at it, kept working. So it's always interesting. Like, sometimes we don't see our gifts or see our abilities, and someone else does. And so I think it is also maybe advice to, like, when you recognize other people's like strengths, don't be afraid to like let them know, like, hey, it's really cool that you do this. Or I admire this ability or skill of yours. So I appreciate
I think when you guys came
all these years later.
Yeah. I think when you guys showed up to a senior show with like fully produced backpacks,
Yeah.
I was like, dang, like
Yeah.
that's hardcore. Like that's pretty awesome. Um, yeah, I guess for those of you who don't know, co-creator of Tessel, backpack, mine's sitting right back there. I have it, still use it. Uh,
That's a good one.
but
Rest in peace.
rest in peace. Yeah, it's all good. Onward and upward, is what I say. But that's, you make a great point, because I kind of have the same thing. And coming on to this podcast with you, I'm like, man, I don't know how Dan perceives. It's been a lot of years
Yeah.
since like sitting in a studio and again, like really trying to figure it out, versus like now we've all been through it. Like we've been through it, like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Been over a decade, right? It's been a
yeah,
while.
right. Was it this year? We graduated in 14. Huh.
Yeah.
There you go. So yeah, it's the same thing where it's like I don't know how I was perceived back then. Um, I knew how I didn't want to be perceived. and and I think again a lot of that's kind of carried through. And I don't know. I kept a lot of chips on my shoulder from those like BYU days where like I really felt like I had more to give, but like I don't know if I didn't know how to do it, or like I felt like I was grasping for greatness, but like I couldn't like in college like fully actualize it.
Yeah.
I feel like that like when I was making shoes was like maybe the first time where I really felt like I'd done something start to finish, like, and that was like the very end. But it's yeah, it is what it is. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So like the all right. So how we're gonna do this one today is I think we're just gonna kind of dive in. I want to ask Dan about or Daniel. God dang it, I already did it.
Don't worry.
Man, Daniel. All right, I'm gonna ask you about just like background, like we were ID together, and then what how that kind of carried over if it did, and then we'll just kind of move into. I think what everyone wants to know is what you're doing now and how you do what you do, which is obviously been super inspiring to a lot of people. And in all seriousness, like is super awesome. Like just seeing what you're doing, moving, like your cleats have been, I mean, unreal. And then, and then the level of talent that they're reaching, especially in sports and soccer. And then, you've gone on now, you're on, which I think is super cool. And then you're doing this like crazy awesome 3D like stuff, which I think is the future. And I think just a lot of people just want to hear about that stuff. So maybe we spend a little bit of time on the background stuff, getting into shoes, and then we'll just move into that because I think it's going to take up the whole time. I think I'm pumped. So yeah, so let's talk about it. BYU, and then we're graduated, and then we never see each other again. Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, did you carry anything? Like what? Like, I mean, I was in the same classes. We did the similar things. Heard the same lectures. I guess how did it translate? And then, like, once you get through that, like, how did you get? I mean, first you got into Nike, which I feel like is the Iron Curtain of the industry, like, and then onward, like, yeah. So just kind of, I don't know, take it away. I'll let you talk and I'll shut up.
I mean, hop in when you have questions
Sure.
and I mean, I won't go into like how I got to industrial design.
Yeah.
But I will say I think that like there's a lot of paths available to people today to make it into the industry. For me personally, a formalized education is probably the only way it would have worked out. Because it's something I've experienced in my career a few times, where it's like when you're at a stage of your life and you want to be in the next chapter, the next phase, it's often difficult to recognize what you're lacking in order to make that jump. So like you're like, oh, like I can draw a shoe. And it's like, okay, but like so can a lot of people. What's your competition? Like, what are people expecting from you? What does the work actually entail? Like all these things that like. So, I mean, I think thankfully I found industrial design. My older brother is an industrial designer, and he was always a creative influence on me growing up. And he encouraged me to switch from graphic design. And so once I got into industrial design, I realized like, oh, this is the thing I wanted to do since I was a kid. I sent a shoe design to Nike when I was like 13 for a Paul Pierce signature shoe.
Nice.
Didn't connect the dots until, end of high school that I could get paid to be creative. And so I think, I'm not sure how other programs work. And I don't think I really understood it at the time, of like what the professors were trying to get me to understand and to learn.
Right.
But looking back on it now with some like insight into like what a real job looks like, I felt like the beginning of the program, probably, the first 2 years was about developing your toolbox, right? So when you open a toolbox, you've got a drill and a hammer and pliers and screwdriver. And you might not have every tool, and you may be really good with one tool and not so good at another, right? But essentially, it was like, okay, we're going to try and expose you to the ways of exploring and communicating your solutions and your ideas. Whether that's physical mock-ups, whether that's Photoshop rendering, or whether it's, hand-drawn, whatever. And, now like new tools like AI, right? Some people are really figuring out their workflow to go from an idea to something in AI. Basically, like, how do you get fluency in these different methods? And so, I had taken like a woodworking class in high school, so I had some exposure to like a bandsaw and, sanders and whatever. But like the education gave me an opportunity to see what was there, 3D printing and a laser cutter and like different materials, and like how do you kind of like explore solutions for your ideas. So like that is not the only part of ID, right? But it's a crucial part, is exploring ideas and then also communicating your ideas to other people. And so I think BYU did a pretty good job of that. And I think, I don't know the latest, but I guess the BYU ID program is disappearing.
What?
Yeah.
Breaking.
Yeah, we can talk about it later.
Oh,
I
holy
think
crap.
this last year is the last, it's like becoming UX, UI or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And then I think more the second half of the program was more around thinking, right? So it's like, you've got tools to show your ideas and to communicate your ideas, but like, how do you come up with good ideas? And so I felt like, I remember we did that sponsor project with Black Diamond for lighting.
Yep.
And Hal was trying to get us to understand like user research, and that research is not an insight. It's like, how do you get from all this information to an insight? And It was kind of like, for my project, I ended up talking in a group to someone who was a backcountry skier, someone who ran Ragnar's, and someone who's a mountain biker. And it was kind of the first time where I was like, oh, like all of these athletes only push themselves as much as they trust their gear. So, they're saying different things about lights, and it'd be nice if I could use a glove to do it, like little like interaction things or preferences, but like the bigger, deeper insight, which I think is applicable to basically all sport, is you can only push yourself to the degree that you trust your gear. If you don't think your climbing shoes are going to stick to the wall or to the rock, you're not going to shoot for a hold. If you don't think that your football boots are going to hold in the grass, you're not going to be as aggressive in your movement, right?
Right.
If you don't think that your seatbelt is going to work, then you're going to drive, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know that I was like very, like, I guess I'm just comparing it to how I am now and where I'm at with a lot of those things. And I think I was just barely starting to get it as a student.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got put in real contexts that I really started like getting into that. And like the feedback that I've gotten from managers and from peers and kind of like the way my career has developed, it's been like that like research insight phase has become one of my like, I guess, strengths, like strategically framing the problem.
Right.
You can draw a pretty shoe, but if there's no story to it, there's no reason for it, then it's like, okay.
Yep.
What does it do? Why does it exist? Why should anyone care?
Right.
So I think in that way, like the program gave me tools to explore ideas and communicate ideas. And then it helped me to start understanding how to like get real insights. And like, again, like I said, if I didn't have a formal education, it probably would have been difficult for me to make it into the industry. But I think there's other people who figure out routes and they have a lot of tenacity and they're just like have like vision and they are, super, prolific in what they create and they figure it out. But for me, like, it was end of junior year, Aaron Puglisi and I had done some bag prototypes for a sewing class that we decided to take. And he's like, hey man, like, do you want to do crowdfunding? You want to do a Kickstarter?
Yeah.
And so in some ways, the backpack startup was the first time I got to really apply this thinking and these toolboxes. And, I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time designing for the backpack company, but it was the first time I learned what product development was. It's like, oh, I have to make technical drawings and send it to a factory and then get a sample back and then make revisions. And that's somebody's job. And like,
right.
And that's a huge part of footwear, right?
Yeah.
You and Colin were talking about it, but like this, like I didn't know development was even a thing until I started doing this, right? And that's like one of my major partners that I work with every day.
Right.
And I'm glad somebody else is doing it and that I
exactly.
don't have to email at the factory and take calls at odd hours to communicate and whatnot. But yeah, it was like, it was very naive and we made detrimental choices to the future of the business, but it worked out and I learned a lot. And so I think, the ID program did prep me for professional world, but I don't think I really got it too much until I was put into situations where I could actually apply it.
Yeah, exactly. I feel the same way. Like, and one thing that you kind of caught on to is like, I feel the same way. Like, I didn't exactly know what I was signing up for. Like, I saw a guy draw some motorcycles, and I was like, wow, that's really cool.
That's cool.
It's like incredible, right? Like, man, that looks real. And there was some kind of like something inside me that was like, man, I want to be able to I just wanted to make something look real, like take something from my mind and create like a real thing.
Yeah.
I didn't like get into industrial design thinking like, yeah, like the toolbox, like I didn't even have one. Like my toolbox was I had drawn people like, and I think that's like, it's still, something I call back to is like some of those principles. But the twist that I did was like, um, I feel like I did not get it, like, like at all, like, and um, and I think like what I was trying to say was like, I really feel like I started to get like not like frustrated, but kind of frustrated. Like, why am I not getting this? Why don't they believe in me? And I started thinking like I started getting down on myself. Like, what? Like, how am I going to get better at this? Like, how do you get better at this? And then I remember just like I would just put a chip on my shoulder and like kind of get rebellious, and not like want to do what they were telling me. And now when I look back on it, like I just feel like everything's an opportunity, right? Like, and um, especially if you're going to take the time to attend a school, which I think I agree with you. Like, I think I really needed to be sat down and like looked in the eye and say, this is what it is. And like told it for like 4 years, like, this is what we need to do. This is what you need to be able to do. This is, and I think for me, it's like it was probably good to not get it and to kind of just keep hitting the wall and keep hitting the wall.
Yeah.
Um, but it's
Yeah.
now made me respect like everything is like an opportunity to like both learn, flex the muscle, get a little bit better, um, and then like people start taking notice. And I think that's what like at the end of it, you want like a job, and you're like asking people to hire you. Um, and so I think like you show that you have like these skills, and you just kind of lay them on the table. You're like, I are these good enough to be paid like for, like, and and like I don't know. Yeah, you don't really like start to get it until someone takes a chance and like it gives you an opportunity. And then you're like, oh man, like it all starts to become very real very fast when people have like invested in you a little bit. And yeah, I would say that's like kind of like my experience. I think like if I could go back, and I would kind of shake myself and be like, you are like, you have these 4 years to just kind of like go wild with it, man. Like get like stop worrying about what the professors think. Stop worrying about
Yeah.
like all this stuff, and just try and just like push yourself is like kind of
Yeah.
think like where I would go with it. But
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I think maybe some words of encouragement to people who are in school or at some phase of their career of like, because this has happened at different stages, right? Whereas like we have moments of like self doubt, or we compare like, hey, like I've been out of school this long, and this person seems to be farther along in their career than me, like all that. But
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, one of the professors told me, I think it was even like senior year, he's like, yeah, for a while I didn't think you were gonna make it. Like you didn't seem to get it. And he's
Right.
like, but then yeah. And so I think, which I think is like accurate, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what I was lacking, right? Because I wasn't in the industry. I didn't know what it really was like.
Yeah.
And some of my like sketches and ideas were just like terrible. Like the design itself was bad.
Right.
Um, but I think like whether you are, rookie of the year, or you don't come into your, the height of your career until 4 or 5 years in, like it doesn't really matter, because in the end, like you're on I know it's cliche, but like you are your competition, right? So it's just
Mm.
like if you are seeking to improve, because like for me, I don't think that I was like exceptionally talented, like raw talent, raw instinct.
Yeah.
um I just kind of like worked really hard and kept doing stuff, like in school when I was
Yeah.
trying to get into footwear. Even now when I'm in footwear, I just keep doing stuff, putting in the reps. I'm not really a gym guy, but I know that if you want to learn any skill, whether it's a language or an instrument or a sport, you put in the hours of doing it over and over again until it becomes something you do without thinking, right?
Yeah.
And obviously it takes some like tenacity. There was times where I met up with my footwear mentor one time when I was at Nike, and we'll get into that in a bit. But
Yeah.
he was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And he's just like, "Dude, you were not sounding very hopeful. Like you seemed like you were really struggling with, am I ever going to get into footwear?" Right.
Right.
And then being on the other side of it, right, where, he could see this shift, but we get into these phases, and how do you, push through self-doubt or push through setbacks, feedback you get from coworkers, or not reaching, goals, whatever. Anyway, just, I guess it's a journey, and try and enjoy it when it's happening. Take the good from, what you can, and then work towards your goals and stuff.
So yeah, I think, let's talk about like going in, and then, I personally want to hear, like, I don't think I've ever heard, like, how did you again get into Nike? But then, that's one thing. But like, you hit on something that I definitely want to talk about, is like, I feel like I see you as someone who is always creating something. And like, I think I remember seeing, when you're at Nike, you're not working on footwear, but you start working on footwear anyway, like, and you're, self-doubt aside, because I feel like I had that too, because I was like, I think I mentioned on the podcast early on, like, my father-in-law was like, how long are you gonna do this? Like, like, when are you gonna get a real job, kid? Is basically what he asks. Like, you're gonna marry my daughter, what are you, like, what's going on? And so I feel like I see you as like someone who was like trying to manifest it. And I thought that creativity also, like, those prototypes and seeing you just like create, was also very exciting for me, to like motivate me to be like, okay, like, Dan's going, I need to go. Like, he's gonna take every opportunity, right? Like, and create opportunities, which I think is a whole nother thing, is like not waiting around for it, like, and pushing yourself to, like, make it happen. Anyway, so talk about that. Like, I don't know if there's much of a story to Nike, I don't know, but like, and then that transition to footwear, I think, is kind of a good place to land.
Yeah, I mean, there's no perfect formula, but I can say like what worked for me. I mean, so a little bit of context. Aaron and I were working on Tessel when we graduated, and I started working at a consultancy in Salt Lake that had some history of doing footwear. And I felt like, okay, this is kind of the way that I can like start building up my footwear experience while still doing this backpack thing to see what comes of it. And I can't say I ever had like big dreams of the backpack company becoming this like massive whatever. But it was fun, and I was learning stuff. And if it like blew up, that would have been really cool. Right. And unfortunately, the consultancy didn't do a lot of footwear projects while I was there. They had started like a in-house hydration protein bottle thing, kind of became the full-time thing that they're working on. And so, I don't know, it was probably like a year after graduating. I was like, who knows what's going to happen with this backpack thing, working for free, and then working, part-time, to pay my bills, pay my rent. And I mean, and I saw a position for, it was a bike designer at Trek Bikes in Wisconsin. And somebody from the BYU program was designing bike helmets there. And so, and I bring this up because there's like a theme of networking, you know,
Yeah.
and so I was able to, you know, kind of go around HR. The hiring manager saw my stuff and was like, yeah, bring him in for an interview, right? Went to final interviews, and then they hired somebody who actually had experience, right? And then I think it was like maybe 6 months later, again, there was a BYU guy at this company. They were doing, it was Dell Computers, doing backpacks for Dell in Texas. And again, I got around HR because, you know, this guy just showed my stuff to the hiring manager, right? And then they said, yeah, bring him in for interviews. And you know, I went through final interviews, going out in person. And so in both cases, there was somebody there that could kind of connect me and around, you know, go around the gatekeepers.
Right.
Because it's really hard when you're first trying to get in, that it's easy for someone to say like, oh, this person doesn't have enough experience, or they don't have whatever, you know, push them aside. Which I get when you're looking at lots of candidates. And so I knew CJ, the bag designer at Code Epoxy. You know, they were startup, their first office in Salt Lake,
right,
out in the canyon. And he was just like, yeah, just show up and start working, and we'll tell you people you're an intern, and then maybe we can get you a job because we need help.
Right.
And it was probably like 2 months in, and like the CEO and some of the other, you know, founders brought me in a room, and they're like, hey, we really like you and we want to hire you. But it's going to take probably like 6 months because we need to hire this person and get up the revenue and whatever. And then 9 months later, they're like, yeah, we're not going to hire anyone. So I worked with Shirley, and she was the apparel designer. And she, I think she had worked at Nike for a bit. And so she had some connections there. And so she like reached out to them and was like, hey, you should really check out this kid, right? And then the BYU guy that I had interned with at Puma in Boston, he had given me a name of somebody at Nike, and I had reached out to that guy multiple times over a couple of years. And then he finally gave me a contact. So I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but I think it was, you know, somebody prodding, you know, getting my work in front of recruiters or hiring managers. And I don't think my portfolio was very good, but I got recruited to do sock design.
Yeah.
And, you know, you say Nike is the Iron Curtain, and I think I took the underground tunnel, or maybe the paraglider over, where it's like, I mean, not to like diminish the challenges and technical complexity of socks, but like, I don't think that the talent pool was very deep for that position, right? So my chance of getting into Nike was much higher at a role that, because everyone's like, I want to be a shoe designer at Nike, right? And they're like, no, socks, whatever. It's just like, for me, it was like, one, it was Nike.
Yep.
Two, it was new technology, and it was sport, right? And so I was like, yeah, I mean, if Nike wants me, like, let's do it. And, you know, the pay was way higher than what I would have gotten at Code Epoxy, and the benefits were way better. And it's kind of one of those things where I was like, you think you want something, and then it doesn't work out, and then something else better works out. And, you know, so I was glad that, you know, not to speak ill of Code Epoxy or anything, but I'm glad that my path diverged from that. You know, I moved out of Utah. I'm from Massachusetts. Like, Utah wasn't like my home in any way.
Right.
Moved to Oregon, and was stoked to be, you know, I mean, great nature in Utah, but, you know, new experiences, new people, new outdoors, just different new experiences. And so I joined Nike January 2016. It's about 2 years after graduating, and joined Sox. And the way it worked is like, we worked on a bunch of different categories. Like, we covered everything, right? So basketball, global football, American football, kids, running, training, everything, right?
Wow.
And so I got assigned a few different categories, and one of them was global football. So
Yeah.
I usually say football instead of soccer, even though I grew up playing soccer, but it's become football in my mind.
Yeah.
And so I'll say American football if I mean American football.
I hope it became football, because that's what it is everywhere else.
Yeah. Well, soccer is actually a name that the British gave it, and then they dropped it, and Americans and Canadians and Australians kept it.
There's my ignorance in soccer already showing. Like, I don't.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell the story some other time, but it is not something that Americans came up with. So when British give you a hard time about calling it soccer, you say, "Is your word, man."
Got it.
But yeah. Anyway, so I got put on global football, and I was working on kind of like the game socks. Like, my first product was the socks that Nike teams wore in the 2018 World Cup. So it's this like cool, big, fun thing, right?
Right.
But then I also worked on kids, Jordan lifestyle, men's training, and running, a little bit of running. And, my manager, Naomi, she was really great, really supportive. And she knew that I wanted to get into footwear. And so probably about 2 years into Nike, because I didn't want to just like get to Nike and immediately try and be jumping ship from the team that gave me a chance. Right. I was like, I have stuff to learn here. I was learning like, how do you work with a triad, like a product manager and a developer and a marketer or merchandiser rather. And then, a triad is called a SWAT team at Puma, and it's called a pod at On. It's basically this idea of like, who do you work with to get a product out into the world? And, I learned like how you work with key accounts, like the stores that these things get sold in, different geographies, like the European market is different than the Asian market, which is different than the Latin American market versus North America.
Right.
So I was learning all the like industry stuff, and like, how do you meet like target prices, right? Like you have a target and going back and forth with the factory, and learning stuff that was super relevant to just being a soft goods designer, right? Whether it was bags or socks, like it's still super valuable knowledge. And so for me, I felt like I was like building up this foundation, building up this experience. And though it wasn't directly related to footwear, it was knit and, flat knit and circular knit becoming more and more used in footwear. And so it was, I know a decent amount of knit compared to someone else who didn't do any knit background. Right. Anyway, so my manager at Nike was super supportive, and she was very much a connector. She was always like, okay, connect. And so she talked to the design director of kids footwear and said, hey, can Daniel do a stretch with you guys? So I still had my sock job. It's like basically an internship. And so I got to do 4 different models. 2 of them got dropped, but 4 different models where there was the adult version. And then I did the adult inspired version for grade school, preschool, toddler. So different ways of entering the shoe, adjusting the tooling to be more flexible and to be more soft, like things where I was actually sending out tech packs, getting like the flat shell pattern revisions and the blueprint revisions, right? Real experience.
Yeah.
And then one of the advantages that I had, and this was like LinkedIn exists, but it wasn't, because I admire the kids that reach out to me on LinkedIn. We have conversations, it's great. But when I was at Nike, I basically would just email footwear designers and footwear design directors and be like, hey, can we have a coffee chat? I'm trying to get into footwear.
Right.
And most of them were willing to give me, half an hour, whatever, and tell me like, this is what I would want to see, or, hey, your work's interesting, but I don't see enough of this, right? Like I was getting this constant cycle of feedback. Like one of the reasons that I got better as a designer is that I constantly submitted myself to critique. Cause I'm like, I don't really want you to tell me that I'm like, yeah, it's good. Like, tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what I'm lacking. Cause otherwise I don't know how to get better.
Yeah.
And it's not always super comfortable to get critical feedback on your work or yourself. But yeah, I met with, dozens of people, and then eventually, this guy, Lee, he kind of became like my consistent mentor that I could go back to. And, I would give myself these kind of self-initiated projects, right? Where it's like, okay, I don't have a project. I'm going to do a running shoe, like a trail shoe. I'm going to do a running shoe. I'm going to do whatever. Right. And Lee was like, I think the two most important things that he pushed me to do is one was to like get weirder and get more conceptual.
Yeah.
And to make things. And he's not necessarily like a big maker himself, but he's like, a sketch is a sketch, but like, can you take it farther? Can you take it past that? Like, how do you like bring this to life? How do you test out an idea?
Right.
And so, I also had a few opportunities to interview internally. Very competitive.
Yeah.
Didn't get selected, or the position changed from a designer 1 to designer 2, and then they hired somebody else, or COVID came and positions disappeared.
Yeah.
But over again, when you're feeling self-doubt or frustration, I think I applied for over 100 jobs over the course of like 3 years.
Wow.
Trying to get my first footwear job. And during that time, I was doing projects, getting feedback, trying to improve my portfolio and improve my skills.
Right.
Because if you're just applying over and over again without doing more work, it's hard to, it's like, oh, your portfolio hasn't changed in 6 months. Like,
right. Yep. Yeah. I've had a couple people hit me up, and I've had one guy in particular who like showed up, showed me his portfolio. I was like, cool. And I gave him like a couple things like, yeah, maybe try some of this, or tighten, your sketches up a little bit, your renders or whatever. And then like, I didn't think much of it. 3 months later, like I totally forgot about him. 3 months later, he shows up. He's like, hey, I did it. And I'm like looking at him like, wow, that does look better. And I was like, well, maybe you could do this and this. And like, again, it was like one of those things where like, I just kind of went on. And again, like, I don't want to say I forgot, but like 3 months is a long time. It might've been even 6 at one point.
Yeah.
And other people come and go, and like, but this guy was like consistent. Now he works in Under Armour. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like this, like consistency and, like seeing improvement even is such a big deal. Yeah. And I think that's something that I think a lot of people don't know too, is that Nike has like stretch, like opportunities, which I think is super cool. A company that big. I even think like even your experience with socks is super unique, because just like the global scale of a place like Nike is something that I wasn't even exposed to at Brooks. Like it's global, but it's not like,
the scale is different.
Yeah. It's like not like, I used to tell everyone like, with one retro, like Nike would do our entire year's like revenue. Like in one retro. And so it's like it's the scale and then the resources. So like being there, and then like who you're connected with is like a whole nother level, like, it's like, I don't want to say like I enjoyed my path there, but there's a little bit of like that, like, I wish I knew, like what's it like to be there? Like,
yeah.
So just hearing about all that is so cool. And then that people will take the time, because that's what you'd hope in the long run, like, is that, that one, that you get seen, and then two, that like people will listen and want to help. I think is kind of what I'm trying to do here, is like, people ask me all the time for help and advice and stuff. So I'm like, why don't I just
Yeah.
make this formal? Like,
Yeah.
and then try to get people that maybe some people can't get, and get this like something that people can go back and review even, because I feel like I'll talk to people and it just goes into the ether. And but like this is like something people can come back and like I'm already going to listen to some of the things you said again, because it's um such a big it's so inspiring. So I like that advice to get weirder. To and for you, like I felt like you did get weirder.
Yeah. Yeah.
and, and so yeah, just kind of like keep going from there. I think that's like I'm like on the edge of my seat. Like this is pretty great.
Yeah. Because I mean, I think BYU is a conservative school, and the ID program is fairly conservative, and I think it puts
Right.
out very solid designers.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not necessarily pushing you to try and be this like evocative, industry changing, paradigm shifting designer.
Right.
And perhaps at other schools that are a bit more conceptual, a bit more towards the art side of ID, maybe it's different. And so Lee had come from architecture into footwear design. And I think one of the things that like, that might separate Nike from another brand is that like Nike was all about like creating the future of modern sport. And anybody can come in and draw a shoe that looks like it came out this year.
Yeah.
That's easy. If you're drawing shoes that look like they came out this year, it's like, okay, whatever. But like, where is footwear going? Like, show me something I've never seen before. And that was even something that Lee would say has never been seen before. And there's different ways to do that. It's through color, it's through materials, it's through constructions, it's through taking something from some other context and then putting it into footwear. And that's how you start differentiating yourself as a designer, to get hired, but then also to be an asset on a team, to be successful in your career is like, like how do you push your industry into a space that it hasn't been? And there are some footwear jobs where, they're basically like, hey, can you make us something that'll compete with a Samba?
Right.
Which is why I probably, lean toward performance footwear as a job, where you're always trying to push new materials and constructions and trying to give athletes more of an edge. And, it's more measured by those sports science or sports psychology things. And then when I do like lifestyle stuff, it's like trying to make something weird and unexpected. I mean, my approach is still like something like clean, but that still evokes like an emotional reaction. Like you're like, I hate it, or I love it. Because I kind of like was like, oh, I like Dieter Rams. I like very like clean, beautiful, design, and I think you can still take that like approach, but then push into spaces that people haven't seen before. Because otherwise, I mean, not to be too cynical, but like you're just making more junk.
Yeah.
If you're making a shoe that looks like another shoe that another brand already has, right?
Right.
Obviously, brands want to take part of the market share of that shoe, and so there is that like context. And sometimes you have to build the inspiration into the project, into the brief. To get excited about it, to feel emotionally invested in it. But yeah, so I think for me, I guess the thing that kind of came from that and how I got into 3D was once I got my first footwear job in Los Angeles, I was no longer at Nike. And because when I was at Nike, I was afraid to share my personal projects because I was like, am I going to get in trouble for
Right.
sharing these? Like, does Nike own these? Like, what's the, because Nike's very locked down on that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think to a point where it can be detrimental, where designers feel handcuffed,
Yep.
and it's hard for them to stay there long term if they don't have the freedom to explore their passions.
Yep.
Right. But anyway, I went to Concept Kick's website and submitted one of my projects by like uploading pictures. Like I didn't have a design Instagram yet.
Yeah.
And it was this project.
Yeah.
The dipped trail shoe. And they posted it and tagged my personal Instagram, which was private, and it was just pictures of my dog and mountains. So I was like, I got to make a design Instagram.
Yep.
And then that's when I started posting all my like kind of like funky hand prototype weird stuff, and Laceless reposted it and Concept Kicks reposted it. And all of a sudden I was just like dropped into the footwear Instagram world. Yep. And I started connecting with all these other designers and being like, oh wow, like all of a sudden, you know, I was a footwear designer, but I was the only footwear designer at the company that I first joined. And so I wasn't connected to all these other people. And so Instagram started giving me this like connection to the industry. Right.
Right.
And once I got on Instagram, I saw what, you know, Finn Rush Taylor and Joey Camus and Tommy Olson were doing with Gravity Sketch. And I was like, oh, this is the tool I've been missing in my toolbox.
Yeah.
And so I went all in on it. And again, I kept giving myself personal projects. I kept doing stuff to teach myself the tool. And then I shared it on Instagram. And so when, you know, I wanted to live abroad and I wanted to work on sport product. And so when I saw the role at Puma in Germany, I applied. And in this case, I just applied online. There was no like, hey, like so-and-so, whatever. Or I think I reached out to Jason Raleigh, who had been my internship guy back in 2013.
Yeah.
But I do know that the hiring manager reached out to Jason because I had said like, oh yeah, like I know Jason, and Jason like vouched for me. So again, like these like networks of people, you never know who you work with now, who's going to be somewhere later, or who you're going to be able to help later. Right.
Yep.
And, but yeah, my Instagram and doing projects, giving myself projects, I think is a big part of why Puma was like, yeah, this guy's only been a real footwear designer for, you know, 6 months, but let's take him.
Yeah.
And part of it was like the 3D exploration stuff where I was being able to communicate my ideas in a way that I hadn't been able to before. And so, you know, I just applied like anybody else at Puma and thankfully got the role. And then I moved there April 2021. So I moved twice during the pandemic.
Nice.
Highly recommend. Yeah. And then, I loved my time at Puma and got to work on football boots.
Yeah. What's interesting that you're saying is like, when I looked at like, when I actually, you know, maybe the first, I'll call it a football boot that you worked on, like, cause you were like, oh yeah, like when you say clean, I'm like, I look at your stuff and I'm like, yeah, it's clean, but there's always this element of like, especially in those boots, like there's a bit of like, just like raw, a little bit of aggression, like, so like, yeah, how are you merging? Like, I mean, I know that like when we start designing shoes, like, you know, it's not your shoe, like it is because you're working on it, but it's like a large sense, it's someone else's. In your sense, it's like athletic, like it's an athlete product. Like it is like it's going on somebody who is doing something. And not only that, but like highly professional, high skill, athletes. Like, I guess like, how are you blending your style with, you know, with the brief, with Like, how are you, like, what, yeah, I guess in essence, like, what's your process then? How are you infusing yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things to, recognize is that every shoe that you work on is a team effort. There's a team in Asia. Usually there's a team that you work with directly. There's product manager, marketer,
Yep.
merchandiser, product developer, product engineer, tooling engineer, like all these things, right? That you work with, a materials designer, graphic designer, design director. You have sketch sessions where the entire design team is all doing ideas for your shoe, right? And I think it's a slight tangent, but like, I think one of the things that makes good design is understanding what the identity of the brand that you are working for is. Because what I designed at Nike and what I designed at Puma and what I'm designing it on shouldn't look like you can just swap out the logo, right? Because like sometimes kids will be like, here's my Nike shoe. And I'm like, the only Nike thing about this is that it has a swoosh on it.
Yep.
Right. And, we would joke sometimes when I was at Puma that a swoosh is the easiest thing to put on any shoe because it always looks good.
We had that joke at Brooks.
Cat is hard.
Yeah. Cat is hard.
Yeah. Or the Jumpman logo even,
yeah.
But
complexity.
Swoosh has movement to it, right? Yeah. And it looks good. But like, what is the thing, like how are you actually capturing the Jordan-ness, the Puma-ness, the Brooks-ness, right? It can be difficult when you're at a young brand and there isn't a deep history. But even On's only, it's turning 15 years old, but there's these very like easy visual cues, right? And then the question is like, okay, how do you evolve past doing the same kind of visual thing over and over again, right? Yeah, so whether it's Swiss engineering or Forever Faster or Just Do It or whatever Adidas is now, like you got this, impossible is nothing.
Right.
Protect this house, right? There's different mentalities of the brand. So I think the personal touch for me comes in a lot more with the like how I approach the problem. So like the aesthetics are driven more by, I mean, obviously my personal taste is going to impact what I draw.
Yeah.
Right. And there's stuff that I've designed that I'm like, I wouldn't wear this personally. But I'm also like, I have, 10 black t-shirts that I just like cycle through, right? Like that's, my personal expression. But I think understanding like who the athlete is, how they see themselves, what their mentality is, what is the identity of Puma versus Adidas versus Nike versus Mizuno in football, and leaning into that kind of like uniqueness. And so I think when you work with your team to identify the deep insight, you obviously there's a million different ways to explore that solution visually, to explore that solution functionally. But I think your personal tastes or preferences or instinct are always going to bubble up as you're making choices about this sketch or that sketch or this solution versus that solution. And obviously you have team and your design director, your manager or your product manager, whatever, like there's going to be points of view on like what feels better for the shoe. And I think it's finding that balance of, I mean, I think some designers see themselves too much as the owners of the shoe.
Right.
and they get too into this, like, this is my vision. We're going to do it my way. I don't care if it's more expensive. I don't care that it's not working properly. I don't like,
Right.
and I think it's super immature. And that a good designer, at least corporate designer, right? Because if you're doing your own thing, do whatever you want. But when you have to make a shoe that meets real athlete needs and sells, like that's how your job, you can gauge if you're doing your job right. Like,
yep.
Is it selling and is it meeting athlete needs?
Yep.
That like to like let your ego take a back seat when like things come up where it's like, okay, like, you know, for this shoe, I really think that like this is the most important thing for us to communicate. So when you come to me and say like, hey, we can't really do this, or this is too expensive, or we're running into problems where like this is delaminating, then you're like, cool, let's figure out a solution.
Yeah.
And so it's a yeah, you're moving lines and updating tech packs and blueprints and things. But ideally, you have trust between your partners.
Yep.
You guys can come to solutions together. You know, tooling engineers coming in like, hey, like this stud is too far into the flex zone. Like,
yep.
You know, and I'm like, oh, you know, it's not going to look so circular in its placement if I move it. But is that really the thing that is going to make this shoe better? No. And so I think it's having, so I don't know if it really answers your question, but I think there's this thing of like, you are an individual working on a team in a brand, and there's layers to like how much those things show up, and even at different stages.
Right. It's refreshing to me actually, because like, and what's funny is like, I hope people are, I think this is so applicable to if you're like, maybe you're not in the industry right now. You might be a year out, 4 years, whatever. You might get in at some point. This is like a masterclass in like understanding like it's refreshing to me too, because I have to remember like at the end of the day, like if you're in a brand, like you said, like if you're doing your own thing, go wild if you can or whatever. But like if you're in a company, like you're a role, like, and albeit like it's a creative role, and a lot of times like it's dependent on you for the product to move forward, and like it's dependent on your vision. But like again, like grabbing like the brand part of it too, like understanding that there's like a history and a company and a people. I think a lot of times like I agree, like you as a designer can really take in like this self-aggrandizing, all-important kind of situation, and I find that that's not like that more than like I've seen it only rarely, which I think is a good thing. It's probably a sign of like a healthy environment in footwear. But I definitely have worked for smaller companies, so it's like I didn't see as many designers. But like the point being is like I guess not that you're like trying to like appease people, or that but like a healthy team like is great for everybody. Like, and I don't want to say like I think I've said it in the past. We might have said it last episode with talking about development, but like relying on experts, and there's a certain skill of knowing when to push and pull, like what you were just mentioning with like a cleat in the flex zone. And like there are some points where I might ask like, well, is it really in the flex zone? But like but like if they're saying it really is, you know, like having the like ability to move and not be sold. And I think, man, I want to say like you and Aaron said this when we were in school, like not being married to like a design, you know, like, and being flexible is such a big thing, but also like, yeah, realizing that like it becomes everyone's product. It becomes everyone's shoe. Um, I think like you were really speaking to like me early days. Like when I first got in at Brooks, I was like a little bit high on my own supply in a way. Like, like, um, and I shared that story last time of like, going to color and being like, why isn't my color here? Like, why is it? And I really got like, like the other part of that story is I didn't share was like that. I mean, that pissed off my developer pretty hard.
Yeah.
My product line manager was also pretty pissed as well. And these were like industry vets. Like they'd been, 10 plus years developing shoes, working on shoes. And just like to hear that, like, and it was of course like naive and it was young and I was, new and really thought like I was coming from like a bag company where I was like the sole like designer on stuff, developer, everything. It was my bag. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like moving into this role, like I think a lot of that carried over where I thought like, okay, I'm a designer, I'm like the guy. Um quickly realizing like that's not like it's not how it rolls. And it's just reminding me what you're saying is reminding me like how like the health of the team that everyone feels contributed, heard, especially you when I feel like everything like comes to a head like at the the stroke of your pen, right? Like the feedback and the work of other people like come into not just to mention like the brand and its history and the aesthetic there, but like it all comes to like this role. Um it's super awesome. And I hope everyone's hearing this, whether you're new or you've been in the industry. It's such a healthy reminder of like, it's a fresh perspective, right? Like kind of a refresh. It's so awesome to hear you talk about that. Yeah, like, yeah, it's refreshing. Like, oh yeah, like,
Yeah. I
should be
mean,
doing
I
that.
think it's interesting. I mean, this is kind of a different topic that I don't think we need to dive in per se, but because of Instagram, because of the visuality of the work of a designer, I think sometimes the the role of the designer is easy to recognize and celebrate,
Right.
and like the costing engineer and the merchandiser aren't getting, you know, their flowers, for
Yep.
their contribution to the thing. And I would hope that every designer, when they share their work, is crediting their team.
Yep.
Um, because it's like the graphic designer that helped, the color materials designer that helped,
Yep.
you collaborated with, development, product management, all those things where it's like, and I mean, unless you're doing your own thing, like you are not a, you know, superhero that's done everything themselves, right?
Right.
And to get a shoe that has, six different price points and is selling over 1 million pairs, like that's a designer does part of that work, but it's a lot of other people that are
Yep.
lifting and contributing. And so
Yep.
I think there's better work when you lean into your team. And I think that, yeah, everybody deserves some recognition of how they contribute.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think I think final topic. Um there is a slight time difference. So I'm trying to
I
be
mean, I'm
mindful.
good.
Okay, I was
No,
like
I'm
trying to
good.
be mindful of Dan here. I don't know about you, but when I hit about 9:30, I'm like powering down pretty hard.
I don't have kids, so I'm it's usually like midnight when I'm
Yeah.
take my dog out at 11:30. And
Yeah. It just depends. Like if I'm getting jamming on something or like even this where I'm like editing and doing stuff, like I will like I'll regret it tomorrow, but I'll be
yeah.
up for a little bit. Um But I do want to ask, like, getting into like, all right, um, it seems like outside of Daniel, the footwear designer, exists Daniel, the 3D printing footwear, like
Guy.
the super awesome work that's gone on there. Like talk about a little bit like what's going into that. Like I'm more interested in like your aesthetic there, like how you're manifesting, because we just talked about it. Like professionally, you have to like not be boxed in. It's a specific design challenge, right? Like to
Yeah.
do all that stuff. Um, the shackles are off, so to speak. Like you're doing your own thing. How do you create in that space, and like what um I guess where are you finding that inspiration? Like are you trying to like manifest like some kind of brand aesthetic, like your own thing? Is it just kind of the wheels are off and one shoe could be different from the next one? What's going on there? Like obviously super cool. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, the I guess everything for me has been like organic. In that like I was doing all of this side work to try and get into footwear. And then when I got into footwear, I just kept doing stuff. Like I
Right.
was already like in that space. And so, I kept doing 3D concepts. And because I was on Instagram, I got connected with Cornelius, one of the co-founders of Zellerfeld. And, you know, I have a bunch of thoughts simultaneously, so I'm trying to organize them in a way that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
so it was like a connection to seeing what was possible with a new, not new, but an actual like high caliber execution of 3D printing.
Yeah.
Because anyone who's 3D printed knows that I mean, if you have trouble with paper jamming and ink issues on a normal printer, like just imagine a 3D printer where
Sure.
there's a lot more. I mean, yeah. Um, and yeah, so I think to take a few steps back,
Yeah.
my professional job is about creating things that work for the athlete and sell.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy that challenge.
Yeah.
And as a creative, I actually probably need more hobbies outside of doing shoes all the time. Um, I mean, I have other hobbies, but I do more shoes than I probably need
Yeah.
to. The thing is, like, I have these ideas that because of the way my brain works, the way I experience the world, the way I process new information, and um, ideas come,
Mm.
right? And so I doodle them, and sometimes I feel excited about them and take them to a next step, right? And so it's kind of like I'm doing this regardless of what happens to the idea.
Mm.
And I think when you work in a shoe context where you have to invest significant amount of money to bring any shoe to the world, where you have to pay for the molds and you have to do a size run and you have to hit minimum order quantities. Like that was one of the things with Tessel, backpack company, where I was like, I don't want to do that again, where there's this pressure to sell these units. And like our second backpack was incredibly difficult to sell because people
Right.
just like didn't get it. And it didn't have the immediate visual reaction that the first bag had. And,
Right.
if I had done it again, which I don't know that I would because I like where I am now, but like should have just done more of that first,
Right.
variations of that first backpack instead of trying
Right.
to be like, oh, but we also do this and we also do this. But as a designer who wants to make things and can launch my ideas with almost no investment besides my time.
Right.
And, maybe a couple $100 for a prototype to, a sample. Like, it does not matter if these things sell or not. Obviously it's cool if people like them and want to buy them, but like, you've basically torn away all of the pressure and anxiety of getting your idea perfect before bringing it to the world. Right. So for me, I'm like, I got an idea. Let me like visualize it and then show it to people. And if like 6 people like it, I'm like, okay, maybe it's not a great idea. And then you do this one, it's like, oh, like 100 people like it, right? Like it's almost this like crowdsourcing of whether an idea is resonating or not. And so I think my aesthetic manifests in different ways in different projects, but it's still that kind of like clean while also trying to elicit an emotional response and be something that kind of looks different. Yeah. And isn't just, another Samba, another Air Force One, another, New Balance retro runner, whatever, right? Like trying to make something different, trying to make something new. And so on these 3D projects, because of the way the shoes are manufactured, like they don't get made until somebody buys them. There's no inventory sitting on shelves. Yeah. There's no upfront investment. The Zellerfeld takes a percentage of the sale. Right. Right. But like for me, it's almost this like almost perfect situation where I don't have to do customer service. I don't have to do fulfillment. I don't have to do sourcing, and I don't have to do logistics. I can just come up with an idea, go through the work of developing it for 3D printing, right, and then put it out there and see if people care about it, right? And again, like I didn't plan on starting my own brand. Like my design Instagram used to be called like Design Shirley. Yeah. Last name Shirley, right? But as my Instagram following grew and these 3D printing projects came up, I was like, well, that's a terrible brand. Like nobody wants to, that it's not a brand. It's just like a design portfolio. Yeah. And so I think the brand is, obviously like I'm inspired by nature a lot and by humans and our experiences in nature, right? And our experiences as humans with each other. And, one of the questions you had sent over was like, how do you get inspired? I think it was. Yeah. And for me to be inspired, I need to consume beauty and information. And as I consume beauty and information, I'm able to remix them ideally in a way that hasn't been done before. Right. As humans, we always try and contextualize something new through what we find familiar. So you come up with an idea and it's kind of weird and someone's like, oh, it looks like a Yeezy. And you're like, it doesn't look like a Yeezy, but that's the only weird shoe you've ever seen. So that's why you're connecting it. Right. Or I didn't look at Yeezy as like a reference or inspiration, right? I was just doing my thing over here. And if it just happens to have similarities, then those are, accidental. Right. But I think like, I'm consuming beauty and information through reading, audiobooks, through podcasts, through natural history museums, through hiking, through conversations with people, through art museums, through TikTok, through whatever. And design is often a remix of everything that's been done before. Right. And so again, it's like, how do I take something from one place and bring it into a new place in an unexpected and ideally delightful way? Yeah. So yeah, the 3D thing was just kind of like, I am interested in the future of footwear and the future of circularity in footwear. I guess one of the lowest hanging opportunities is single material shoes. Yeah. Shred it and you can turn it back into string filament that then gets printed into another shoe.
Yep.
And obviously, like it's not a perfect solution, and there's loss in there, and there's energy consumption and all that. But like,
yeah,
I do care about the future of the industry, the future of the planet, the future of people, and so it's a way for me to kind of like, even if like Zellerfeld doesn't become this super successful thing, or I don't become a super successful designer, it's this like doing my part to explore the possibility. And then also it's fun for me. Like I do it because it's fun for me.
Right. Right.
And if you're not having fun as a designer, then I don't know, yeah. Figure it out.
Right. Do you have any like, just like examples of any of the beauty or the information that's inspired you recently? Like I think your most recent 3D that I think you might be still developing or whatever, for me is like I'm ready to offer up money for it, but like it is, like, I am interested in like, well, like what is something that's like really, maybe it's what's grabbing you today, but is there any information, like anything of like how you take that and then use that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always like, for example, there's always a debate in footwear, like what is actually best for the biomechanics of your feet, right? It should be zero drop, or it should be wide toe box, or it should be this or that, right? Yeah. And then there's also like trends, like low profile shoes have made more of a comeback recently, and that's probably going to let barefoot shoes become, so sometimes these things on your mind, but I also think about like, my personal experience with footwear, and like, because one of the criteria I'm trying to give myself when I do these footwear projects now is like, would I wear this? Obviously it would be like, not a black t-shirt kind of vibe, but like, is it something that like I like enough to wear myself? And I mean, that's not the only criteria, but anyway, the point being that like, I think sometimes when I'm working on something professionally or on my own, there's like a very clear, obvious inspiration. Mm-hmm. Like the bumpy shoe is inspired by bike tires.
Right.
Right. And other times I think that our brain, when it's getting all this, I mean, I just know how my brain works. I'm sure other people have other experiences and have different processes, or different tools, right? Where they're using more like mathematics to drive things, or they're plugging things into an algorithm to spit stuff out. But I think like in some ways, like, your brain is an algorithm, right? So you're like, I listened to this podcast and I saw this at a natural history museum, and I went to another country and saw this custom or this like behavior, and your brain is kind of like mushing it up.
Yeah.
And then when you're looking for ideas, or even when you're not, or sometimes when you just have quiet time to kind of not do anything, whether it's in the shower or on a walk or whatever, your brain then like regurgitates that remix, that mashup, that stew of things.
Right.
And sometimes there's like things that you get obsessed with, right? Where it's like, oh, like I want to have like I love the idea of like erosion, right? So like everything I'm doing is like, how does wind and water impact different materials? Like what happens to stone? What happens to wood? What happens to whatever? so I think sometimes you kind of like get into a theme and you go
Yeah.
on that. But I think for me, it's sometimes it's not so obvious of like why an idea is bubbling to the surface.
Hmm.
But like I said, when it's just my own thing, I don't really need to overthink it too much.
Yeah.
If it bubbles to the surface and it's like, oh, what if I did like a, so for like this, I don't know if this is the one you're referencing. This is a miniature of it, but the
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yep.
um, this idea of like, okay, like we say like, oh, it's natural, right? And then there's this idea of like supernatural. And the way we
Mhm.
use the term supernatural, it tends to mean like phenomena that you can't necessarily explain. But I'm like, well, super also means like very. So like what's very natural?
Mm.
And you could say, oh, 5-finger toe shoes are supernatural, or just wearing nothing is supernatural.
Right.
But I kind of like this like tongue in cheek idea of like, it's natural, but it's exaggerated.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the name of it's going to be supernatural. That might be
Yeah.
not inspiring enough, but that's kind of like, I guess the inspiration of it. And then, it's like I took a scan of my foot and I built it around my foot. So there wasn't a last,
Yeah.
And I tried to print pairs and I messed up the settings. So they're too stiff to really wear.
Yeah.
I kept changing it and I thought I got it right and print a, do a 60-hour print. And then I was like, oh no, it's still too
Sheesh.
stiff. Anyway. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. So I guess, and then is the plan then for that one? Is that going to find its way to the Zellerfeld community, the website, or is it like?
Yeah. I mean, I hope so. I don't know what I can say and not say, but I think that they are expanding their last library.
Right.
And so I'm hopefully going to get a pair soon to see like how one of the new lasts is fitting, and it is this like zero drop, kind of thing. So cool. Hopefully, I mean, it's that thing is like you've always got all these ideas, right? But then it's like, what do you have time and interest, motivation to do?
Yeah.
I've lots of creative idea projects, right?
Yeah.
But this one, if I was going to leak information, I think it would be probably the next shoe that comes from me would be this one.
Yeah. Well,
but I don't know the timing on that because they have to. There's stuff out of my control, right?
I'm not trying to ask you to leak, but it's just interesting. Like, I guess I was kind of just trying to poke it, like, well, what's next for Dan? Like, Daniel, dang it, it will happen. What's next for Daniel? What's next for Heck Lab? Like, what's your like? I mean, it's fun. I think it's just fun to just create. So I don't think you need to have an answer for like what's the future, like, because a lot of times like you're just going. And actually it's been nice like just talking to you, because it sounds, what's nice is it like, I like that it starts to root back to more like artistic work. I think like a lot of like industrial design is just like that. It's like design, and it's, you get, again, like what happens is like the money gets in the way. And I think that's kind of a lot of like, or like the company, or like margins and blah, 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 blah. Like, and so I think like that's kind of why I like really took up like being really gestural. And like, if I was going to post a sketch on Instagram, I was going to try to make it like just different, like wild, whatever. Maybe the sole is like ironically too huge, or like the bevel is impossible, like, or it would suck to walk in, like, but I think like it's just fun to just get back into like this, this artistic side, where it's not so like I don't know, it's not corporate, but it's like, I don't know, it's just refreshing. It's refreshing to hear more of like creative, like vibes, creative juices, you know, like reactionary things to the world, rather than like, you know, very like, you know, performance driven, this, that.
Yeah.
It's nice to like talk about like a synthesis of um, thoughts, you know, like into a creative project. I think that then becomes a product, which is interesting, like a wearable.
Yeah.
Um, but like, yeah, it's just so cool to have like a side of that where you are just like purely creating, um, based on your own experiences. So I'm not like so what I'm trying to say is like I'm not trying to get you to like announce. What I'm trying to say is like, yeah, like if you have like a vision for what you want to do, like, you know, you can obviously pitch it, but
Yeah.
if you're
No,
just, yeah,
I think in my career, I've had different visions and goals at
yeah,
different times, right? So when I was at Nike, my vision and goal was to get into footwear design.
yeah,
And then I got into footwear design, and the vision was to grow as a designer, get into performance sport, move abroad. And then when I was doing that at Puma, it was kind of like, okay, like where do I want to go next? What's important to me in terms of my next experience, where I get to do more of this strategic, open space, new, but still performance. And like, I really love the outdoors, and
mm-hmm,
can I live closer to the mountains? And so I was like pretty deliberate about looking for opportunities with On,
yeah,
this location in Switzerland. Um, and then obviously like the brand and the product as well. But like, I was making choices based on like kind of what I wanted. And so
yeah,
now I'm at a stage in my career where, I've been at On for 8 months. Um, and I'm working on tennis, but then I've also gotten to dip into some stuff for track and field. And there's, maybe potential to dip into some other things as well.
mm-hmm,
Um, and I think there's a lot of things in life that like outside of just your career, right? So, you know, whether you have a partner and where you live, and if you want to spend your morning surfing, or if it's important to be close to family, or you really want to
yeah,
be working in the sport industry, like these things start shaping choices you can make or choices that you want to make.
right,
It's me and my dog, so it's been pretty easy to bounce around, right?
right,
My brother, who's an industrial designer, has been at 2 companies,
right,
um, and he has 7 kids. So it's like it's not an easy thing to just like
yeah,
and I'm sure there's things that he would have liked to explore, but then he's also really been able to carve out a good career for himself, and make himself kind of like unfireable.
yeah,
I mean, maybe, but like, anyway, I say that all of that to say that like for me at my current stage of my career, like I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 years,
yeah,
um, but I'm kind of at a point where it's like, okay, the location I'm living, the what I'm working on, and the brand that I'm at feel really good, and maybe that will change in years
yeah,
to come. Priorities will change. I meet somebody and have a partner or whatever. Um, but right now, like my professional job is uh, scratching a certain itch that I love around brand building and those things that like you have to really nail, like the athlete and their journey and their mentality and their performance needs. Like I really like that, the challenge of making a shoe that like performs and sells.
right,
And then I'm also getting to scratch this other itch where I just make stuff I want to make.
yeah,
Um, and so I think some people are like, oh, like, are you trying to start your own brand? Are you trying to make, live off of your sales of shoes, or you want to be a freelancer or whatever? I'm like,
Mhm.
there's pros and cons to everything, right? And I like having a paycheck.
Right.
And I like being at a brand with resources where I don't have to do everything.
Right.
Right. Where it's like, I do this and then it gets passed off to marketing to sell.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the funnest things. This was my first shoe that I worked on at Puma.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the launch event in Paris with Neymar and all these, media. We were doing some interviews and things and all this
Right.
content. And I was just like, even when I was at Nike, like the socks didn't get any marketing. Right. So all of a sudden, like the thing I worked on is this like huge, super visible, like thing. And it was just like, I was like, I'm glad someone else is taking care of this. It's really cool to see
Yeah.
what other people's talent take it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't have to do everything.
Yeah.
And I get to spend more time designing
Yeah.
and less time answering customer service emails,
Yeah.
which is what I had to do with Tessel.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a very valuable lesson on how to write tactful email replies.
Gosh.
But yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like
So
you're enjoying life. Yeah.
Yeah. And for now, like I said, like it's a journey. And I mean, not that I think sometimes I'm like, oh man, I spend too much time doing shoes. I need to do other hobbies.
Right.
I need to like focus on making, more friends or whatever. But
Right.
I think like as long as you're enjoying something, like try and sit in that as long as you can.
Right. Right. That was like one thing, like, I think, like I got to Brooks and was like, oh, this is great. And then I was like, oh, this is still great. And like 3 years, I'm like, still great. 4 years, still great. 5 years, it's still great. Like 6 years, I'm like, is this
Ready
still
for a
great?
new chapter.
Yeah, I was like, is this still great? And like very quickly I found like I had this, the itch to move on, which I like kind of always knew was there. Like it was, like on the horizon, but like never really knowing. Like I had friends like that left, not just designers, but everyone like from all over the company and people I really liked. And I had one product line manager just say like, I knew it was time to go when I stopped learning. Like I just hit this moment. And for me, it was like, it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't learning. It's like I found that I reached the point where like I have done this product and like something inside of me says that there's more out there to do. And it's probably time, like but you're right, like the future is like I bounce around between having goals sometimes. Like it's like it's nice, but at the same time, like I think what's starting to motivate me more is that I'm putting in effort. Like, and if a goal helps you do that, that's fine. But I think the atomic habits thing, right? Like you don't get better. Like you can want to win a basketball game, but like looking at the scoreboard, like isn't going to get you the win. Like looking at the scoreboard, hoping that it's going to say like, that you won like 62-60. Like it's not like, that's not the thing that gets you to that win, right? It's everything in between that. Well, man, this has been awesome. Like every bit as much as I expected it to be. Like it's just always fun to hear like this. It's a fresh perspective. Like I mentioned this like at the last podcast. I'm like, there's a point at which like Colin's kind of been like the co-host, right? But like there's a point at which like he might go off and do whatever, and I'm going to be over here doing this thing. Um, but like just being somewhere else, like you with On 3D, with your experience with Puma, like, which is honestly, like, that's just like, it blows my mind. Like, I know I've put shoes on people, like, but like Neymar, having Bieber with the like the 3D print, like in the same picture, like
Yeah, I
that's not
wasn't expecting
photoshopped.
that, but
Yeah, like, like I understand, like like I think my top one's like Jeremy Renner, like kind of random. Like, who would have thought?
that's a good story though.
Yeah, like you're like,
His
wow.
recovery. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like so random, like in um, humbling at the same time and kind of just like awestruck, like um I like you, I'm from East Coast, middle of nowhere. It's like it's not like anyone thought that was going to happen.
yeah,
I guess anyway, point is like this has been awesome. And to hear your perspective, having gone like a whole different journey, still in footwear, but like, learning similar things but differently from different people. It's just awesome. And so again, this is like the whole point of this. It's like I feel like people should hear these conversations. They're just so cool. Like and motivating, especially for me. Like now I want to go check in on my developer and be like, hey, you good? Like, hey, like I have a really good material designer, and like I just want to like I think everyone's gonna get a Christmas card, or like I'm gonna go out today and like do a little extra.
yeah.
So yeah, any last words? It could be a word of advice, could be anything. A lot of the people who listen right now are just like those guys wanting to get in. Anything you want to say to them before we sign off?
I mean, if they've made it this far, then congratulations,
Yeah,
guys. You've won a
yeah,
prize.
probably not. But if I clip it,
No, I mean, yeah, it's been really nice, and I hope that it's helpful to other people.
yeah,
Because I think like the more, um, it's really hard to visualize yourself in a space without any examples.
mm-hmm.
It's one of the challenges of like, for example, like women in performance footwear design. There's so many guys, right? So it's
Right.
challenging sometimes to see yourself there if you don't see other examples of it. And so I think like when you're trying to visualize yourself in the footwear industry, when you see more people and hear more experiences, it becomes easier to see like I can do that. Like
Yeah.
I can get there too. And that was like for me, like my brother Nathan uh, was the kind of like creative example to me, and that's why I drew, and that's why I went after graphic design, and that's why I switched to industrial design. Right? Like he kind of like cleared the path a little bit, and let me know that I could go that way
Yeah.
instead of being a history teacher. But I think I don't know. There's lots of advice for different things, whether it's networking or how to get out of times of self doubt or how to like build a portfolio or whatever.
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think like the thing that is important to remember is, among many things, is that I think anybody can get into the footwear industry, but like it's not something that's going to happen for you casually.
Mm-hmm.
Like I worked my butt off for years to get in, and then I've been working at work and doing stuff on the side to keep building my skills and to to kind of catch up.
Right.
I've only been a footwear designer for 4 years. Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing stuff. I mean, I've been a professional for
Yeah.
a decade, but in shoes as an official footwear designer, right?
Wow.
And yeah, like if you want it, and I'm not really one of those guys that is like, you know, inspirational quotes like hype, do your reps, like,
Right. Yeah.
you know, David Goggins, 75 hard, whatever. Sorry, Kenan. But like, these are my old teammates. But like, if you want it, you're going to have to dedicate yourself to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that I'm not going to tell you like don't have a social life and don't prioritize your relationships with other people, or you have to
Yeah.
hustle all the time, or you have to do this, you have to do that. But like whatever your path looks like, you have to. It's got to be one of your top, you know, 3 priorities, 5 priorities, whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's not going to casually come to you because you did a couple footwear sketches when
Yeah.
you were in school. Because like the level of talent in the industry is high.
Yeah.
And you can be a good designer and you can put in a lot of work, but and I don't mean this in like a competitive like, hey, like it's you against this person, but like there's a path for both of you to be successful. But you need to recognize, like I had to recognize the gap between where I was and where I needed to be able to get a job in the industry.
Right.
And that was through feedback, that was through taking on projects, that was through going through interviews, and yeah, just continually going after it. And I think that's probably true for like any thing that you want to be successful in life, if it's music or if it's design or if it's investment banking, you got to go.
Yeah.
You got to go after it.
Yeah. Like, man, I think about it all the time. It's like, it's hard to like be authentic or be like, you know, like a serious footwear designer if you're not like, you don't like really know what's going on, like have a finger on the pulse at least, like of footwear. And like I've been in it long enough to see it shift and like, you know, like at least in you know, what appears on the runway versus like what people actually wear. And like I've seen enough where I've seen like, you know, the Roshi and like Nike basketball really take off again, and then it kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit. And like, you know, it's got to be something you're like into it, you know, like, I think that's good. That's probably like a good thing to kind of sign off on. Like, it's not going to come casually. Like, I don't know anyone
unless you are, I don't know, super gifted or nepotism or something. But
yeah, like, yeah, like, like you
start
are,
your own company.
You're Phil Knight Jr. I don't know, like, like I don't know, like I don't even think that's even like I don't even think that's possible. But but yeah, like the point is, yeah, you know, dive in. Luckily, I think most people who want to get into this industry have a bit of a passion for footwear. So it helps, but, yeah, man, that's awesome. Good stuff. I'm excited to share this. Man, it's been I like for me, like a humbling experience to have you on. Again, someone who like literally I ripped like my portfolio for
I didn't know that until you shared it.
Like literally I was like, I remember sending that email being like, hey man, how's it going on the portfolio side? And I saw yours and I was like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. Cool.
And but, I would have said that that's, you know, not a very, I don't know. I think the thing that got me into the program is just that I had my little like, what did I learn from this project? And they're like, okay, his stuff isn't that good, but he's at least learning and getting it. So
right? Like I don't know. I hope. And then I actually took good pictures of stuff. I think that was like that. It was like, yeah, you laid out a page well, and the pictures are at least like lit in a decent,
Yeah.
half decent way. Like, so your project doesn't look awful. Um, well, that's awesome, man. Thanks. I mean, obviously, thanks for your insights. Thanks for
No, I'm
this whole thing.
super happy to come chat with you and catch up and
Yeah. You,
share.
you will hold the record for longest episode for a little while.
Well, maybe you can chop it into
Yeah, we'll figure
something
it
more
out.
digestible.
Yeah. Like, I definitely have plans to segment it out a bit. There's some good stuff I think we can pull for like, entry level people, like how to get in and stuff like that for sure. And because we touch on so much, I think it's good to kind of break it down. I'm going to do that with Doug's episode as well. Like, I think we've got some very good like snippets that we need to make sure get seen for sure if you're depending where you're at. But yeah, thanks, man. All right, you go get some sleep, and I'll keep going for the rest of the day. But anyway, yeah, this tech packs are due. Again, I hope that like by listening to Dan, you understand like when I say tech packs are due, it really means something. Like it's got a lot of baggage behind that phrase.
Yeah.
And again, like and subscribe. We have our Instagram, tech packs are due. And look for the reels to be coming. As I have learned how to make them.
First step.
Yeah. So good stuff. Thanks, Dan. We'll, maybe we'll catch you another time.
Yeah. Thanks, Jake.
All right. We'll see ya.